and thanks for joining me. I absolutely cannot wait to show you how to paint this feather. It's a perfect art project for this time of year. Such beautiful warm colors. No matter what your experience is with watercolor, I know that you can paint this feather. It's just one step at a time, and I'll show you how. Lightly sketch or trace the outline of the feather. I have a PDF that you can trace onto your paper. I'm using a 5x7 piece of Arches 140-pound cold press paper. For your first wash, make a puddle of clean water and mix just a little bit of yellow into it. This yellow is M-Gram Indian Yellow, a classic warm yellow. Today's painting will be with just 3 paint colors: Indian Yellow, Alizarin Crimson, and Payne's Gray. This first wash of yellow is going down onto dry paper, but it's a very watery wash, so it will make the paper fairly wet and it will stay damp for quite a while, allowing us time to work with it. Watercolor works in layers, and so we can add these light layers and know that we can always put dark on top later. In some areas, I'm leaving the white lines of the paper going upward and outward from the center rib. This phase of watercolor is very forgiving, so just relax and have fun with it. As you work down each side of the feather, be sure that you don't leave any puddles of paint or water. Dry your brush and pull it out. You don't want the puddles to stay, they will dry unevenly and make a background or a bloom. As you get closer to the base of the feather, add some little wispy lines. Your brush should be fairly dry at this point so that they're very faint and wispy lines over the dry paper. Now add some clean water to some red and some yellow. I had this little puddle that I had worked with earlier in the day and I just wanted to reuse it, so you can see how easily this paint rehydrates and the colors are still bright and vibrant. After I'd put in this darker edge, I rinsed and dried my brush and then dragged the thirsty brush across the wet edge and out across the paper. This is creating a broken and ragged edge with a dry brush. After putting in these darker areas, I will rinse and dry my brush and lift a little bit of these darker lines. This is picking up or lifting a little bit of the paint that you've just laid down, and it really softens all of the edges really well. One of the biggest mistakes I made as a beginning artist was focusing too much on the details too soon in the process of painting. At the beginning, we need to keep all of the edges soft, our colors light, and be thinking about those overall shapes, not the details. The further along you get in the painting, the darker the colors will be and the more details you will get to have. This was really the first time that I'd paid any attention to that center rib, defining it at all. And now I'm just blending that line out. I don't want it to be all by itself. I want it to be connected to the other lines. Now mix in a little bit of Payne's Gray. Payne's Gray is actually a bluer based gray, and so it contrasts really nice with these warm colors of the alizarin crimson and Indian yellow. Notice how much the gray is blending into the other colors. The paper is still quite damp, but it's not glistening wet. Now I'm mixing a much stronger Payne's Gray, much darker and more concentrated for the top area of the feather. I still want to keep those edges very soft though, so I feather them out and make them look a little ragged at the end. Here I go back into the alizarin crimson and add just a touch here at the top. It's just so fun to add the colors and let them blend. Be sure to leave the gap at the top of the feather if you like it. I think it's fun. It's my favorite part of this feather. It seems to add an element of realism, a little bit of imperfection to it. Here I'm reminding myself to leave that top edge not perfectly straight, a little bit uneven, and don't fill the gray in all the way. Leave some of the red showing through. On the left side of the feather, I'm making some irregular marks along the outer edge or rim, and I just want to define that edge just a little bit, and it just needs to stay irregular, not too precise at all yet. Now I'm going to define the rib of the feather a little bit more. Now my mix is a little more yellow than it's been up until this point, a much more yellow orange. And I don't want it to be a solid line. I am kind of dotting it along. And then I'm just making a few lines that connect from the darker areas on the left side down to the rib. I don't want to do too many of these. It'll just get too repetitive, but have fun with it and just see what looks good to you. Continue adding darker elements to the far left side and alternate between grays and the warm reds. For the narrower side of the feather on the right, I'm going to bring more of the color all the way in towards the rib. This will give it a little bit of contrast from the other side, and it will be more gray as well, more grays pulled in. You can see that I'm alternating between my two puddles of paint, my Payne's Gray and my orangish red, and just dropping them in at the same time, and then they blend together. As I begin this upper area, it's noticeably darker than the rest of the painting. It's very important to have some elements of your painting to have a dark value. If your entire painting is only light values and light colors, it will have a washed out appearance and it just will be lacking in contrast. I also think that this dark neutral color helps the warm yellows and oranges stand out. That's another thing that's important to have as contrast in our paintings is warm and cool colors. The paper underneath is getting more and more dry, and so it's easy to get those rough marks. My paper is getting drier, and also my brush and the paint that I'm putting on is thicker and drier, and so the texture is really building up here. Leaving gaps between the dark gray will just really shine right now, and that's called negative painting, painting around a shape that you want to leave visible. This is my favorite stage of the painting. We're getting to put in those details that we were blocking from our mind from the start. So adding in some dark elements to the rib, and I'm just being careful not to make a completely solid line. It's a little bit of a broken line still, and dropping in this dark color towards the base. I want the edges of the feather to be more defined, so I'm adding darker colors along the edges. And you can see I'm kind of just bouncing all around the areas of the feather now. I'm not working in just one spot. I'm trying to make sure that it's balanced all the way around and has a unified feel at this stage. I'm also going to start connecting a few of these lines to the center rib, but definitely not all of them. Again, I think it's important in anything that we're painting to make it look more natural, for it not to be too regimented and for not too many predictable patterns. I'm using a much lighter tone here, a more watered down paint, and this paper is pretty much dry underneath. I want to keep that area away from the edge a little bit lighter overall. I'm back to darkening the right side of the feather. You can see that watercolor is just a process of building layer upon layer, and it does dry so much lighter than it first looks as you lay it down, and that's okay. We just continue to darken up and refine the areas that need it. Just remember with all of these layers that even if it is a slightly lighter color, we want to be really careful not to flood this area with paint. It will lift and bloom too much. This is the tricky stage of the painting, trying to decide how much more to do and when good enough is good enough and it's time to step away and just let it dry and see what we think for a while, and we can always come back and see if it needs a few more details later. Thank you so much for painting along with me. I've enjoyed this and I sure hope you did too. Bye for now.